So, yeah, I saw Sam's got these little packets of syrup, which I hadn't seen before. They're just £1.50. I think Sam might correct me. But Shane says they're really handy, and what he does is he gets the little crown of thorns that you use to put over the Queen's marker, and you just stab it into the pack, put it on a colony. At a time when there's a lack of any forage for the bees, you might want to just feed them at a particular time. I'm thinking about June, but June this year was pretty good. But anyway, Sam, do you want to add a bit more to what I've just said, and then maybe tell us a bit about what you've got?
Yeah.
Shane was going to tell us, he's going to kind of let us say when to put what on when, roughly. David, I know, will also know all about that, David told, as Peter Buston will as well, and some others as well. But I think David would be the better person to add to that, David, as long as you're happy with that. But
yeah.
But Sam, if you just let us know what you've got, if people want to know how to get things from you, like fondant, syrup, and that kind of thing, maybe you can let us know.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks very much for the invitation tonight. So basically, my husband and I took over Whitefield Apiaries on the 1st of April this year. I recognise a lot of the names already because I've worked for Peter and Marion for about 5 years, so I recognise a lot of the names. So basically, we've taken over the bee feed side of the business. So we're the UK distributors for BRBKA syrup and fondant. So the syrup, we sell in the 14 kilogram jerry cans. We can also sell in IBCs as well. But as Chris said, when I saw Chris at Kevin Derris, we also do the pouches. So they're the 1 kilogram pouches, and a lot of beekeepers, I'm no beekeeper, so I don't profess to be at all, but what I'm finding is a lot of the beekeepers are quite liking these pouches. They're getting more and more popular. And then we've got the fondant. So we've got the 1 kilogram and 2.5 kilogram fondant. We also have the Fond du Beef Rook, and we do sell Candipaline as well. So like I say, I'm not a beekeeper, I'm learning and I'm really enjoying it, but everyone's got their own methods and ways of feeding and what they feel they should feed at different times. But that's basically an overview. We live in Garth, just outside Bilth. So I've got connections. I can still drop off in Brecon. You know, Peter's willing for me to drop off there if it was easier for some people. And you're very welcome to come to the farm to pick up if that was easier. So, you know, don't hesitate to get in touch. And if we can help, we certainly will.
Thank you, Sam. Just to quickly say, because I recognise some beginners with us tonight, that the syrup that you have, do you know it's thick syrup that you sell, I think, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. The pouches are the same as the jerry can?
Exactly the same.
Okay, and the candy pollen, so that typically you would feed, I would say you'd feed that in the autumn. If you're feeding any other time in spring or summer, well, pouches you can feed any time of the year, but spring you might feed with a weaker syrup. But we won't discuss that just now, but in more detail. But the candy pollen, for those, I'm sure you know, but just to say that includes a pollen substitute, yeah. So that includes protein, and I mean, I find it particularly useful when I'm rearing queens early in the year, when the bees haven't got much pollen in. I can give them a pack of candy pollen to get them to keep them going. The fondant, particularly useful. Traditionally, we added it at Christmas, but I did say I'd let David talk about this, so I will do. But before David says anything, there's what do you call the fructose syrup candy? What's that called? Fond du Fruc or something?
Fond du Beef Rook.
Fond du Beef Rook.
Yeah.
That is, as I'm led to believe, is mostly fructose rather than glucose. Yeah. And so what you find with that is that it's quite pliable in the summer, whereas the normal fondant might be a bit stiffer. And I know for one, Peter, for example, would put that on instead of fructose, or either or. He would rather put that on in the summer when there's a shortage. They'll take that like honey. They won't store it. They'll just feed on it. So you don't have to worry that they will be mixing that with the honey, in theory. Okay, David, did you want to say anything at this point?
Yeah, well, I've been using these products for some years, regularly buying from Peter Guthrie, and it has always suited my setup. Gone are the days when I try to make up sugar syrup. It's a great advantage to always have some of this ready-made syrup in the tank, and you can just fill up your can and off you go, because people got to remember that you often have to feed at any time of year, depending on weather conditions and circumstances, and particularly if you're doing splits, making up nukes, and so on and so forth. You often have to feed these bees, and as I say, it's certainly something I tend to either carry with me when I'm going to the apiaries, or I leave these jerry cans on the apiaries, so that I've always got it there in case I need it in an emergency. As far as the debate between using fondant and syrup, really the truth of the matter is that the best time to be feeding your bees is to feed them to capacity in the autumn, at the end, late September, early October, and make sure they have enough syrup taken down to supplement their own sources of honey that they got in the nest. As far as fondant is concerned, yes, I always look upon that as a bit of an insurance policy. I try to avoid using fondant as much as possible, because I feel if I give them enough syrup in the autumn, then I don't need to give them fondant to take them right through to the spring. But in late winter, I am monitoring the weight of the hives, and I do occasionally give fondant if one hive starts to get light. But I know a lot of people feel reassured by using fondant as a routine, either giving it at Christmas or the other time is Valentine's Day. People talk about giving them a slab of fondant then, which is fine. But when you've got larger numbers of colonies, it can become a bit more expensive. And that's why I concentrate on giving enough syrup in the autumn. Candipaline I've used in the spring, particularly if I feel the colony is short of pollen. And I've been very impressed with candipaline in that it never seems to go hard. Whereas the straightforward, the ordinary fondant, Fondabee, will tend to dry out and go solid as a rock, and then the bees can't use it. I can't really comment much about the Fondabee fruct because I haven't used that, but I accept how it's being promoted, and I do know that commercial beekeepers often will put it on at certain times of year, when they take the summer crop off, and maybe they're waiting to take the bees to the heather or whatever, because it acts as a bit of an insurance until they can get the bees onto the heather, and possibly then they'll be okay. But there's always a bit of a danger period when you take the honey harvest off, that you mustn't take all in case weather turns foul, and your bees could starve in between taking off the harvest and moving them to another crop. And also, the heather can be quite unpredictable as to when it will yield, and it very much depends on weather conditions and so on and so forth. So, not that I take my bees to the heather anymore, but I have done in the past and managed never to cause my bees to starve. But I know it is possible for people to take bees to the heather and the bees starve. So I can see that there is an application of using, say, Fondabee fruct in that situation. So yeah, I'm quite confident in all these products. and I'm sure that people make up their own minds as to how they use it. Okay, I think that's all I need to say.
Thanks, David. Peter, did you want to say anything?
David said it all.
Great stuff. So, Sam,
Yeah.
if somebody wants to buy some products off you, you've got a website, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got a website. It's www.yfieldapries.co.uk.
Yep.
Or I can email you. You've got all my details, or I can email them you again, Chris, and you can circulate them around the group. Don't hesitate to ring if you needed to pick up night, weekend, whatever. It's not a problem. So just shout if we can help in any way.
And as you said, you're based in Garth, but you will drop off at, I know, because I picked some syrup from up at Peter Guthrie's that you.
Yeah, so if it's easier, we can do that, no problem at all.
Brilliant.
And, can I just ask, can you fill up these large containers? I mean, in the past, I've had my own IBC, you call it, don't you? And I sort of picked up a ton of this from Peter's in the past. Are you able to?
Yeah, as long as we've got notice, that's fine.
You could fill my tank up for me.
Yeah, we can sort that out.
Okay, very good, thank you.
That's good to know, actually. I'm thinking of getting an IBC myself, but
Yeah, that's fine. Just get in touch.
Thank you. Anybody else want to ask Sam a question?
Do you stock anything else apart from bee feed?
No, I don't. No.
No.
So actually, Sam, I think in that case, Peter Guthrie is still supplying beekeeping equipment, isn't he?
He is, yes. He's still supplying that.
So if you want, okay. So if you're short of anything, Peter Guthrie at Bockford Brest has some beekeeping equipment as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else like to ask a question?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm sorry. It was. I'm not at all. It's Jane. I'm not at all confident with I don't really. I've read the book, but I'm still not confident with bee feeds. Do I start feeding bees in the autumn, or leave it till winter? Do you start feeding bees? And I know that you're all familiar with candy, pollen, gold, Fonda bee candy, Fonda bee fructose, invert bee syrup. Is that the IVB syrup that you mentioned, Chris?
Oh no, an IBC is just a container. So ignore.
Oh right, invert bee syrup anyway, and
yep.
Organic Fonda bee. I'm just looking at the website.
Okay.
So I know we went through those, and I wrote some notes. So the candy pollen,
yep.
It includes the pollen substitute and the protein, and that's good for rearing queens and in the winter. Is that right? When there's no pollen available.
You don't. I wouldn't feed it in winter. It's. I use it for rearing queens. You might want to use it in the spring to get your bees going, to get them stronger.
Early spring.
Building up as the spring comes on, particularly if there's a lack of pollen. However, we're lucky in this country in that we do get a lot of pollen, I would say. So it's a rare case, I would say, to put it on. But there are beekeepers who swear by it and say that their colonies come on much quicker if you feed candy pollen in the spring.
I've seen that we've used that at the Wern, haven't we? I think is that
yes.
Yeah.
So we used it. Mostly we used it in the queen rearing colony.
Ah, I see. So that's why you were using it, right?
Mostly, unless David or Peter wants to chip in here. I don't know. That's what we use it for mainly this season, I think.
Yes, I think you'll learn to recognise how much pollen you've got in your colonies in the spring. So when you're doing your inspection, you can get some idea of how much pollen the bees are storing in their combs around the brood nest. And if there is no pollen there, we're talking now when you start inspecting from, say, April onwards, there should always be a certain amount of surplus pollen there, particularly around the brood nest. And if there's not, then it should indicate to you that there is a shortage, and that's when you might consider investing in something like candy pollen. But it very much depends on the season, and it becomes a part of your inspection procedure that you've got to learn to recognize whether there is enough pollen in your colony or not. If there is enough pollen there, then there's no point in feeding canipoline at that stage of the year. And as Chris says, it's more suitable if you're going in for things like queen rearing, where you're trying to make sure that you're nourishing the queen cells to the extreme that you're producing vigorous young queens to hatch out. As far as when you feed the syrup, with your colony, which you bought for me as a nucleus, and I did say to you at the time, you may well have to give them support syrup feeding throughout the whole of the summer to encourage them to keep drawing the wax until you get to the stage where you've got a box full of comb. The critical aim for you is to make sure you've got a box full of comb, in other words, 11 or 12 frames with fully drawn comb by the end of the summer. And so normally you can't overfeed syrup unless, as long as you're giving them space to store it. But as far as for the feeding for winter, then we like to give them the winter feed starting in late September, early October. And the idea then is that they can take it down enough of it and get it capped over before you stop feeding them. And then they'll have enough stores to take them through the winter. You've got to bear in mind an average colony requires about 18 kilograms or 40 pounds of stores to take it through the winter. So that means you're looking at, on average, it's about 8 full frames of stores. Say you've got 12 frames in your box. The outside 8 frames have got to be full of stores, and the bees will be living in the central 4 frames, where they will continue to breed probably until about the beginning of November, when breeding stops. And then that will be where the cluster resides, and then gradually feeds on the stores throughout the winter period, working their way upwards and outwards as they consume the stored food. And the idea is that ideally they shouldn't reach the top of the stores until the spring. If you've given them enough, then they often should, if you inspect your colonies in late winter, they should still have a certain amount of sealed stores above the brood nest as spring approaches. If they've eaten right up to the top of the frames by late winter, then that's when you need to put fondant on. And fondant is like granulated honey. If you're not sure, then that's the time to put fondant on, because they will come and use that like they would granulated or set honey, because they will have to collect water to dilute it to make use of it. And in the winter, they can get enough moisture just from condensation from their exhaled air they breathe out. There's enough moisture in that to actually melt the surface of the fondant. But they may also have to go and once they start rearing brood, then they will have to go out and collect water and bring in to help dilute the feed, dilute the stores to feed the brood. Brood are very hungry, and they eat far more food than the adult bees do.
Thank you, Jane. Hang on, Jane, sorry. I can see a couple of you got your hands up. So Claire, Isla, it doesn't look like Isla, but Isla, you first. But let Jane just finish. Jane, did you want to just say something?
No, that was a really helpful answer, and I've been able to write it down. So thank you very much. I remember things better when I write them down. So this has been a good opportunity for me. Thank you.
Don't forget, I'll put this video on the website when it's finished with Sam's details as well. So, Isla, It's not either, is it?
It's certainly not either. No, I've borrowed my daughter's laptop. It's Jason Warbone. Hi, Guy. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
I'm not far away from you, Sam. Actually, in Garth.
Yeah, you're just neighbouring, just a couple of fields away.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Just a general question, really. I've got 15 colonies myself, and probably not warranting an IBC, but just what's sort of shelf life, and this is sort of a question to anybody, of the syrup, because you know, if you bought an IBC and you filled it up and you're only going to feed 15 colonies at a certain time of year, how long is that likely to last? It's probably too much for me, to be honest.
Yeah, could I just say, I think you need, if you're going to buy a ton of it, you need at least 50 colonies to use it.
Yes.
So no, you've got to rely on the jerry cans, really, which is not a lot more expensive. Yes,
No.
Chris.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it will, I mean, if you make syrup just out of sugar and water, if you don't use it, it'll ferment. You can put palm oil into it and it will help to keep it. But I do, Sam, I don't know if you know what's added to it. Is it, I mean, what it doesn't.
Trade secret.
Quickly.
It's a trade secret.
Okay, it's a trade secret. But so how long does it last, Sam?
Shelf life is at the moment, coming in is December 2022.
Okay, so it should last.
Just over 12. Okay.
Oh, months.
All right, thanks, Sam.
Okay, thank you.
So, Claire, you put your hand up, Claire. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, it was just a clarification. I mean, I'm not in the same ballpark as other people here. I've just got 2 colonies and I don't really intend to go above 3 ever. I go between 2 and 3. I've got 2 at the moment. I'm intending to take the honey off the penultimate week of August, about the 17th, 18th, somewhere around there. And I'm listening to David say not to feed syrup until the end of September, whereas I read other things that say as soon as you take off your supers, then you feed. So I'm wondering whether I wait until the end of September or whether I feed them syrup as soon as I've taken off the supers.
Can I just clarify this? It very much depends on when you've taken your supers off, it very much depends on how heavy your colonies are. You can only tell by hefting or inspecting them. And so, some colonies, different colonies behave in different ways. I've got colonies now which are starting to fill the brood box with stores in the outside cones because the brood nest is naturally shrinking. And I wouldn't ever touch that. So it's something you have, once again, it's something you have to assess when you examine your bees. What different years vary, but last year I was in the situation where I didn't actually take my supers off until early September, and as soon as I took my supers off, I had to turn around and feed immediately because there was just no nectar coming in my area in late August, early September. So I took the supers off, literally gave them some feed at the beginning of September, not the full autumn feed, but just typically I gave them what I call a 7.5 pound honey contact feeder. So, you know, it was about 7.5 pounds of syrup of the Fonda bee, invert bee syrup, just to tide them over, which was all they needed to keep them going. But it meant that it gave them plenty of space to continue breeding and also to take advantage of the ivy, which soon started to come in, flowing. The ivy nectar started to come on stream in about mid-September. But it's very much a matter, there's no hard and fast rules. You have to decide on what to do according to the season and what your bees need. So it's going back to this principle, you've got to learn to heft your hives, know how it feels. Without even opening up the hive, you can tell what the feed store level of stores are in your hive by hefting it. You know, if you've got a couple of, you know, you should be able to assess quite quickly. I'll give you a rough idea of whether they're short of food or not. But every season is different. But the key point I was making is that when you're giving them the autumn feed for the winter, then I wouldn't do that until the end of September, because I don't want to crowd out the brood nest.
Yeah.
Because I want them to be continuing to produce winter bees from mid-August onwards, mid-August through the beginning of November. That's when they're going to be producing the winter bees, and I want to give them space to continue to breed. And so you mustn't overcrowd them. But on the other hand, if they need syrup, when you take the supers off, you've got to give them syrup straight away, just to keep them going. And the other key thing I haven't mentioned is the advantage of this invert bee syrup. It's a very stable product, either in your jerry can or in the hive. And even if the bees don't cap it over, providing the colony is strong enough, they sometimes don't bother to cap it over, but it doesn't ferment. The only time I've seen it fermenting is when a colony is too weak to maintain good internal hive conditions, and I have seen it ferment at the margins of combs. And if you get some fermenting invert bee at the end of winter, it indicates your colony is quite weak, whereas a strong colony would normally cap over all the syrup you give them, and you would never expect to see fermented invert bee in a stronger colony. So it will absorb water in a situation where your colony is not strong enough. It should be stronger than that. The advantage of invert bee over making up your own sugar syrup is that if you make up sugar syrup, the strongest mixture you can make is about 1 kilogram of granulated sugar in 630 mils of water. That's fully saturated, and that's adding sugar to freshly boiled water and stirring vigorously, because you mustn't boil it. You cannot get it any stronger than that. And the disadvantage of that is that it will only be stable for about 7 days unless the bees take it in and convert it, because it's sucrose, a disaccharide, and the bees have to convert it into monosaccharides, glucose and fructose, which immediately increases the solubility of the sugars, or that increases the concentration of the sugars, and they may even drive off water as well before they store it like they store the honey. So a lot of people still make up their own syrup, but it requires a lot of effort, and you've got to make sure that then you finish your feeding soon after the end of September. Otherwise, the bees haven't got time to convert the granulated sugar, the disaccharides, into monosaccharides and drive off excess moisture and cap it over. So we certainly find that now people use a lot more of products like invert bee, that we see much less winter dysentery than we ever used to. And that's because what people are feeding to the bees is a much more stable product.
There are ways around making up your own syrup if you want to. I mean, you can add some thymol that stabilises it to a certain extent, and I use invert bee, but I do make up some of my own syrup as well. Depends how many hives you've got. It is a lot of hassle making up your own syrup, but I always use a bit of thymol oil in it, which stabilises it anyway, and that has a bit of a added bonus in that it can help control varroa as well.
Yes, that's adding thymol to homemade syrup is an old method which people obviously, like Peter, still use. personally, I've never liked it because I think, well, it makes it stink. And if I find it unpleasant, I don't know what the bees think really. So it's not something, I have used it a long time ago, but I don't anymore. Well, I rely on invert bee now, but because it gives me the confidence that I'm not going to run into, as I've already explained, I'm not going to run into fermentation problems with it stored in the hive. And once again, I would say, if you do get fermenting invert bee, it's usually because the colony is very weak and you've had excessive winter die-off of the colony, premature aging and death of the winter bees, so that the cluster is not big enough to look after all the syrup that's around them. So I'm just talking. I've not read anyone else talking about this, but it's my own observations. I have found that and literally you can tell if it's absorbed water because it gets much more liquid. And the trick is, if you take these outside frames out and just shake them over the ground, it'll just pour out like water. So it obviously tells you that it has absorbed water, whereas concentrated invert bee is not so thin as that really. And you get the smell. You get the smell of fermentation as well. Once again, that's something else you might detect. But hopefully you won't run into that problem. But the key thing is to make sure you don't get excessive winter die-off of your bees.
So, David, thank you. We've got a couple more. See, Peter's got his finger raised, and also James put a comment in the chat. So, Peter, do you want to ask a question first?
Just to follow on, thank you. I'd be interested to know two things. One is why one can't boil the sucrose solution. And secondly, as a homemade winemaker, I have been used to boiling sucrose with a teaspoon in a gallon of sucrose solution. I can't remember what strength off the top of my head, with a teaspoon of citric acid, and that converts the sucrose to fructose and glucose. Do beekeepers ever use a practice like that?
I've never heard of anyone adding citric acid. First of all, I would say that the point is it doesn't matter if humans eat boiled sugar. After all, we consume large amounts of jam, for example, but it's because when you boil sugar in water, it produces a byproduct called HMF, or hydroxymethyl furfural, which is quite harmless to humans, but it's harmful to bees. That's why we should say you should never boil the syrup when you're preparing it for bees. I have seen, when I visited Denmark on a study tour, I saw a commercial beekeeper. He was making up his own granulated sugar syrup, and he added vinegar or acetic acid to his mix to once again to convert the disaccharides into monosaccharides. But though he obviously, it's cheap for him and he does it, and he obviously doesn't think it does any harm, but personally I don't think it's something I would do, because once again you're adding something that's foreign to the bees, adding vinegar to the mix. I just don't think it's not natural, and it's like you adding citric acid. It's not natural. So I'm a little bit dubious about these processes. But if you want to experiment with it, that's up to you, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Of course, I mean, if you do add vinegar or any acid, the bees don't receive that vinegar or citric acid because it produces a chemical conversion with the sugar anyway, and starts the inverting process, doesn't it? So you're not actually kind of ending up feeding the bees vinegar or citric acid. It's used up in the chemical conversion.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. You'd be producing an acetate with vinegar or citrate with citric acid. Yeah, but once again, citrate or acetate aren't natural products to go into the hive. That's all I'm saying. That's my only opinion about it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. And I think, Peter, I think you answered. Sorry, Peter, was that Peter and Fran? Peter, did that answer your question?
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
yes,
you.
yes,
It did. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm interested. I'm quite interested in what you said about citric acid converting sucrose to fructose and glucose. I might look into that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I use a bit of vinegar myself.
Yeah, I didn't realise that it did that. So, sorry, Peter and Fran.
And thymol, yeah.
And thymol.
Of course,
I don't mind the smell.
Vinegar would be anathema to homemade winemakers.
Yes.
After all, homemade winemakers spent quite a lot of effort trying to prevent the vinegarization of their alcohol. But I do know, for example, from our chickens, that some people put, acid vinegar into the water. So, and citric acid is a component of fruits, a natural component of fruits. So, I wouldn't argue the toss with David and your experience, but maybe they're not quite as unnatural products as some of the other things that might be around. But I'm very satisfied with the answer. You know, the voice of experience is much more important than my own hypotheticals. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Peter. No, but it's interesting. Thanks for adding that. That's great. Jane, is Jane still there? Jane, I think Peter Bustin answered your question in the chat.
Yes, it did. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful answer. Yeah, because I've been worrying about my sugar syrup, and I'm actually really glad I was here because I bottled one lot and left half in the bottle, thinking I'd be able to use it because it's just sugar.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound as though I can if I've left it a week. So I'll throw that away and make it fresh each time and just do smaller portions. It's 1 key to 1 key, isn't it? It's equal parts.
No.
Yes.
Huh?
Well, for summer feeding, yes. But,
Yeah.
But not for autumn feeding. You've got to make it a lot as strong as you can. Like I said, 1 kilogram in 630 mils maximum water, and that's the strongest sugar syrup you can make.
Okay.
But for summer feeding, or or early autumn feeding, when you're feeding to make the bees to draw comb and not store it,
Yeah.
then it's fine to go 1 to 1, because otherwise they'll need to go and collect more water. They need water to vital part of their diet anyway.
Okay, I've seen my bees drinking out of puddles. Yeah.
Yeah, because they get minerals as well. If you use dirty water, they're taking up minerals at the same time. That's
yeah.
no problem. It's no problem.
Yeah, it was interesting. Thank you. Thanks. That's been very helpful to me. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, any more questions or comments about feeding bees?
Yeah, of course. There's also a cost implication, isn't there, really? When the cheapest available sugar you can get is around about 63p a kilo, and I don't know how much you charge, Sam, for say a 14 kilo.
If you were to pick up at home, you came to pick it up, be £14.50.
But so, how much is that a kilo? It's just over £1 a kilo.
Yes, 14 kilogram is £14.50.
Yeah. Okay.
So by the time you've messed around with making your sugar and the power to kind of dissolve it and everything like that, it's not a lot more to kind of go and get a better product, is it really?
No.
I find that really interesting because I've always, when I've seen it online for sale, it looks really expensive. So I'm pleased to have Sam's details because I could collect from Sam. So because I've made my sugar syrup, and it's been fine, but you know, I have worried about it. So I think I'd appreciate having Sam's details. Especially seeing as I haven't got a lot of bees to feed, so a lot of colonies to feed, so I think I can afford it.
Great. Yep. So when I put the video up, I'll include Sam's contact details as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So it's about 8:15. There was I don't know if, I think Chris Thomas asked a question. I think Rich is gone now, but Chris just asked a question about the process of taking off the honey, treating varroa, and feeding. David, I don't know if, just for the beginners, is there something you might recommend if they take? I mean, I would say you take your supers off, you treat for varroa, and then you would feed. I don't know if you want to add anything in more detail.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well, if depending on when it suits you, I mean, you can take your supers off anytime from now through to early September, depending on what you want, when it fits in with your other commitments. But you've got to remember that if you're going to resort to these medications, whether they're the soft chemicals or hard chemicals, there's only one product that you can use and leave the supers on. In fact, you must leave the supers on, and that is the Mitaway Quick Strips, which is quite a harsh medication, and you have to leave the supers on because you put the strips over the brood box, and then you have to have supers left on above to give the workers refuge to escape to. Poor old Queen, she has to stick it out down below, and I've always felt sorry for the Queen. She can't escape, but the majority of the workers can go upstairs and get away from the worst of the fumes. But the advantage of formic acid, or Max, is that it penetrates the capped brood, where probably about 80% of the varroa are at any one time when there's a brood when there's sealed brood in the colony. About 80% of the varroa are within the capped brood, so it kills those as well as the free living varroa on the adult bees. And the course of treatment is 7 days. It's a short, sharp shock, and it's a product actually I've used for the past 3 years because it suits my system. But having spoken to other people and read a bit about it, I'm going to reduce the dosage this year, because I did have the experience last year of losing several queens, which I put down to overdose with the Max formic acid. But I will still use it on my stronger colonies, but I will leave the supers on while I do it. Whereas all the other products that you use, whether they're the soft chemicals, which formic acid is considered a soft chemical, like all acids are, all organic acids. You can use thymol, which is considered to be another soft chemical because it's a natural product, oil of thyme, but you do have to take all the supers off because it will taint any honey that's left in the brood box. And if you at a later stage, months later, if you chose to extract any of these brood frames, you could still smell the thymol in it. So it's very persistent. So and that's called oh gosh, what do we call it? Oh dear, I've forgotten the name of it.
Apicard.
Apicard. Yeah. But so it's vital with Apicard, which is a gel formulation in a tray. It's a 4-week treatment, and you do have to take the supers off first. And the other products as well that come in strip form, there's other thymol-based ones called Apilife var and Thymovar, which once again have got thymol as the active ingredient, so it still applies to those. But if you go onto the harder chemicals, which are the Apisan stroke Baverols and the Apivar, not Apilife var, Apivar or Apitraz, all these which are stripped, impregnated strips, once again, you have to take the supers off first, because these products are wax soluble. They will get into the wax and stay there for long periods, and also could contaminate the honey. So you must, with all these other products, you have to take the supers off first. And then, as I've mentioned earlier, when you then feed, it depends on whether your bees need it straight after taking the supers off. And in most instances, if they've still got enough food left in their brood box, then they'll be okay to carry on, and will also have the space to breed through late August through September and early October. But it's something you have to make an assessment of and decide whether they need feeding straight away or not. But on many seasons and on many occasions, you don't have to give them any feed until late September. But you can only rely on that on your observations and hefting the hive and deciding whether the bees have got enough feed to carry on with. I think I've answered all that. Have I missed something?
No, that's great. Thank you, David. Unless anybody's got a question they want to ask. So I think we've covered the things which I think we should be talking about at this time of year and for the next month.
Did some people have questions about swarming and all that sort of thing?
Well, I'm just thinking it's 8:20, and I had a question from Rich, who dropped off a little bit earlier.
Right.
Was it swarming? No, it was
I was interested in the question about thinking a hive is queenless, because I've got one that may be queenless. Jury's still out for another couple of weeks, but I was interested in that question.
Okay, well, have you got a hive which is queen right?
Yes, but she's not. The colony is really strong. It's the biggest colony I've had. There's so many bees, but
yes.
She's blue queen,
yes.
And she seems to have gone off lay.
Has she gone off lay in the last week or 10 days?
Before that, but
Right.
There's a little bit. But just a tiny bit of unsealed brood was in there when I last inspected last Saturday.
Well, if you could, all you need to do is just find one egg. Or it doesn't matter. If you can just find a frame with one egg on, you could shake the bees off and put that in the other hive as a test.
Right. I was a bit reluctant to do that originally because I thought that one might be queenless as well, but I did actually see her on Saturday, so I'm confident now that they've got their queen.
I would be inclined, ideally, to go through that queen right colony and ideally look for a frame with quite a few freshly laid eggs in it. So you're looking for eggs that are vertical in the cells, and perhaps a bunch of them in a, I typically, if you've got brood of diminishing age from the center, so you've got sealed brood in the center, and then you go into larvae of diminishing size, and then at the margins you've got eggs. That's the sort of frame which would be ideal. Shake the bees off that, put that in the middle of your suspect hive, and go back within 5 days. And if it's queenless, there'll be emergency queen cells. Quite obvious within 5 days. Maybe, if you know what you're looking for, you can even see them in a couple of days.
Yeah, I will try that, David. Thank you. My problem at the moment is that since I moved my bees to this beach copse in Lanfranach, I really struggle to see any eggs because the light's not good in there. So I'm really struggling.
You need to take yourself a good LED torch.
Oh, right.
My
partner has said to me get a head torch, and I was a bit skeptical.
It's better to have an LED, one of these pop torches which got a good intense light,
Yeah.
Shine directly down into the cells. I don't think you can miss the eggs then, and particularly if you choose frames which are of the right color. I mean, frames that are not too dark and not too light. So very light, freshly drawn comb is often, it's difficult to see the eggs, and if it's very dark, it's difficult to see the eggs. But if you get a medium brown color, often you can see the eggs better that way. So
thank you very much. I will try the LED torch, and I will look for eggs and do exactly as you said. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say, Claire, a head torch isn't powerful enough. You want a small handheld.
Well,
Yes.
I did think a head torch might be a bit tricky inside my bee suit. So.
No, it's a waste of time. I've tried using head torches when I'd move bees at night, and you know the light doesn't go out outside the vat. It's a waste of time. No, you've got to have a handheld little pocket torch, handheld LED torch, and even the small ones can give quite a strong beam, and you can clearly see the eggs there.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll give it a try.
If you want to hand, Claire, just give us a shout.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I'm always turning to you in times of crisis.
The only thing I would add is that if they've been queenless for too long, and you've no longer got any young bees, they're no longer able to make queen cells. But it very much depends on how long you've been waiting for, really.
Okay. I've held off because there was one queen cell still sealed, and 2 weeks later, it was not there anymore. So I'm just thinking maybe there's a virgin queen. I don't really know what happened to that colony. I don't know. She was an old queen. She was green. Whether they did a supersedure and it failed, because there were a lot of queen cells in there at one time, and I didn't destroy any. I just left them to it. But I haven't seen brood now or eggs or anything for 4 weeks. Yeah,
it's you might just get away with adding a test frame now, but if it gets beyond 4 weeks, the bees may be getting too old to make queen cells.
I don't want to risk the other colony, which is really strong, because as I've said, I don't want a lot. So if I get one strong colony going through the winter, then I suppose I'll be happy, because hopefully I'll be able to split them next spring.
Yeah, but it's a bit of a hassle if you lose a colony now through queenlessness. It'd be better. There's plenty of time for them to raise a queen cell and rear a new queen. As long as she gets mated through August, it could save the day. I mean, after all, that a lot of supersedure goes on at this time of year. I got colonies suddenly producing a few 3 or 4 queen cells, and the queen is fine. There's nothing wrong with the queen. In fact, I don't want to go on about this, but I've got a theory that all these queen cells are at the margins of the frames, and I think it's because there's a few anarchists in the hive, and perhaps her footprint is not, she's being a bit lazy and not patrolling the whole of the comb. And if she's not leaving a footprint pheromone, that's where the bees will make queen cells. And it seems to me as though she's not doing her job properly. She's not pacing the boundaries. And that's why you get a few, what I call anarchists, who think, oh, well, let's make a queen cell. And then if she's worth her salt, in many instances, if they don't protect those queen cells, she'll go around and kill it. So I've had cases where there's been 1 or 2 queen cells appearing at margins, and then next time I look, and they're torn down, and I think it's because she's found them. The queen's found them and killed it. She stings it through the side of the cell, and she kills the pupa, and then once the pupa is dead, the bees tear the cells down. And this thing about tearing queen cells down, it seems to be a feature of different colonies. Some colonies will leave empty queen cells there as trophies, whereas others will always tear the queen cells down once they've been used. And it's one of these differences you may spot if you have enough colonies to observe and see what's going on. There's so much to observe if only you've got the time to do it. and you detect different behaviours in different colonies. But I would certainly, if they were my bees, I would be going and finding, as I say, a test frame, put it in straight away. You've got nothing to lose. It'll either work or it won't.
Okay.
But it just seems a shame just to let that colony dwindle.
Yeah, I don't want to. I'd like to try and do it, but I didn't want to sacrifice the other one because she seemed to not be laying so much. So.
Well, she'll come back into lay again. You know, that since this, who knows? Maybe the excessive heat, maybe they got overheating, maybe they decided to stop feeding her.
They're very overcrowded, I think.
Well, that's right. It could be that they stopped feeding the queen to make her stop her laying, because it's the bees that control the queen. She does what she's forced to do, and it could well be something, a knock-on effect from the recent hot weather. Maybe they couldn't keep the hive cool enough.
They didn't swarm this year, and they're really, really loads. And I've got, I think, 5 supers on there at the moment, and even when I open it, all of them seem to have bees in them.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great. Yeah, that's lovely. You've got a good, productive colony. They don't necessarily want to swarm, and it sounds to me like it's a good strain of bees if they kept themselves together and not swarmed, and that's why you've got all those supers on there. I'd say well done, and try and hang on to that strain of bee, really.
You can always introduce a laying queen, a mature queen, if you.
Yeah, I've thought of that option, but at the moment I'm still sort of half hoping that there's a queen in there that I just haven't seen, and she's not coming to lay yet. But I think from what David said, I'll put a frame in from the other colony anyway. If I can find.
Just wanted to add that Rich, who dropped off, he asked the same question about 2 weeks ago, and he's just started keeping bees, and he's got I think he's got 2 colonies, but he's got one colony that's queen right, but only had about 4 or 5 frames of brood. And the other one he thought was queenless, but he said, I don't want to invest a whole frame into that colony. What I said to him was, well, look, put the frame in to test it. And you know, if they make a queen cell, let them make the queen cell, and you can cut it out. Right? So you can cut it out, and then put that frame of brood back in the old one, and leave the queen cell in with the colony that needs the queen cell. Now he did that. Now I've done that many times, but I've yet to find out if it's actually worked or not. But that works if you need to do it.
Right. So do you cut the queen cell out and just insert it into one of the other frames?
Well, what you do is you get a middle frame near the top of it, make some space in the comb with using your hive tool. So you've got to cut the kind of comb back, and you just push it gently onto the comb, so at the end of it it's pointing downwards, and the bees will fix it into it. Put it back in carefully, and that will work. I've done that 4 or 5 times this season already.
Cut plenty of wax around the queen cell, you know, don't.
Okay.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, if you're going to put a test frame in, you'll have emergency queen cells produced, and they're produced from a worker cell. Therefore, the bottom of that queen cell is fixed to the midrib. Therefore, it will be closely adherent on the comb. So as Peter says, make sure you cut widely around it. And try not to handle the actual queen cell, and push the cutout wax around it into the other frame, trying not to disturb that queen cell at all, because it's not like a swarm cell, which typically is hanging freely, either in a hole or around the margins or whatever, and it's much easier to cut out a swarm cell, because it's not so closely adherent to the comb.
I use a small craft knife rather than a hive.
Like a Stanley knife type thing.
Yes, you've got to have a sharp knife. It's one other thing you ought to have in your toolbox, really, is a sharp knife.
Yeah, I've always have a Stanley knife with me, so yeah.
Yeah, good.
If in doubt, leave the frame in there. But,
yeah, that would be the easy option, wouldn't it? Oh, that's really helpful advice. Thank you. I'll see what I can do. But so I'm still hanging on in there, thanks to all your support. So
good. We like to see you carry on.
Yeah, I hope to be more active maybe next season. I've had my mother, who's in her 90s, living with me all through since COVID, and she's still here. So it's made it a bit difficult year, but I do hope to be back at the Wern helping at some point.
Well, you'll be very welcome.
That'd be great.
Very welcome.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else want to ask something? Or we
Yeah,
should
just
end it there? It's about 25 to 9.
just sorry, just a very quick question
Who's
about
this?
the
Julian,
last
sorry.
week you said about leaving all the queen cells. Now I've read someone saying if you've got multiple queen cells, only leave one, and if you hear advice about leaving two just in case, ignore it, only leave one. And obviously another book says have two, and then I had the same thing. I left all of them, just in case, because it's a natural colony in the end. They're going to have multiple, they know what to do with it. So what is the consensus of opinion? Do you leave all the queen cells, or do you leave one, or do you leave two?
Well, the thing is, it's a difficult one if they're all sealed, because you don't know what's inside the queen cell. If you've got multiple queen cells because they've gone into swarm mode, or they've already the swarm's already left, then the safest thing to do is to leave an open queen cell where you can look in it and see that there's a nice fat juicy larva in there floating on royal jelly, and then you can destroy all the sealed queen cells. The problem about just leaving one sealed queen cell is it can be quite deceptive, because sometimes the cunning little bees will seal them over once the queen has emerged, and you can get a so apparently sealed queen cell which is empty. And also you never know, not all queen cells, once they're sealed, developed into a hatching queen. There is always a certain amount of wastage there. So it's my opinion would be to, if you go into the hive when the queen has already left with a prime swarm, and you're trying to reduce the risk of casts being produced, then I would be inclined to reduce them to one unsealed queen cell. If you read Wally Shaw's booklet, he goes into this in great detail, and it's well worth a read for something you can really read well between now and next season, because the swarming season's over now, and maybe get a bit more familiar with what he's writing about. And the title of this booklet is "There Are Queen Cells in My Hive, What Should I Do?" And he goes through a series of sequences of where you try to interpret what state the colony is at, and then make the right decision at the time. We do come across beekeepers who panic when they go into a colony and start seeing queen cells. They knock them all down before they realize the queen has gone already.
No,
that is disastrous. So the message I would leave with you now is, whenever you go into a colony and see queen cells, don't panic. Go through the whole brood nest, recording what you see and the quality of the queen cells that you see, and then look for possibly eggs and recently hatched eggs if possible, and the quantity of eggs, and also the demeanor of the bees. With experience, you get to recognize colonies that are queenless. If a swarm leaves a colony, and you know your colony well, in the first day or so, the bees seem to be fairly quiet, and there's fewer bees around, and you get that sense that you've lost bees. And then after a few days, the young masses of young bees start to hatch, and the numbers will build up rapidly again. And within about a week, you won't realize you've lost any bees, because there's loads of young bees there. But as time goes on, also, you'll find a change in the demeanor of the bees. They often, the pitch of their hum changes, and they obviously are they're irritable, and the frequency of the humming increases. I don't know whether that's the correct musical term, but you get used to detecting a change in the noise they're emitting. And I reckon that I can always detect a queenless colony just by the sound they emit when I open them up. And they're not happy. They will start to calm down maybe when they get the first virgin. And they get even happier when she starts laying eggs and the first larvae appear. They really then will calm down again. And these are all audible signals that you will learn you will gain knowledge in the sounds with the more experience you get.
Right.
There's no indication by the size of the queen cell, because I had multiple and some were quite, and I think they were emergency ones because they were in the middle of the frames and on different frames. But one was notably smaller than the others. So it didn't make any difference to me, as I said, because I left them. I left them all.
Yeah.
What they wanted to do.
If you believe everything Wally Shaw says, he says it doesn't matter. They should all have been, no matter what size the queen cell is, they should have all been equally fed. But and therefore they should produce equal daughters. But I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that. But it's a natural urge for you to probably cull the smaller queen cells and leave the larger ones. But if you're going down the route as I recommended of leaving one open queen cell, then that makes sure it's developing well, and then it's on a decent position on the face of the comb or whatever, somewhere which isn't going to get damaged when you move the frames about. I mean, it often there's some queen cells that are in safe places and there are others which are not, and you've got to take that into consideration as well. So all these things you have to sort of weigh up in your mind, and as I say, I would say leave a good decent size queen cell, open queen cell, where you can see a decent sized larva curled up floating on royal jelly. That's the one I would leave, and I would destroy all the others, including the sealed ones, because there's no guarantee what's inside those sealed cells. And you cannot age them. You can age an unsealed cell by the size of the larva. You can, with experience, you can estimate how soon it will be capped over and how soon it will hatch within a day or two. But once it's capped over, there's no true way of aging the queen cell. Though I would finally say sometimes just prior to hatching, you may see a brown ring around the tip of the cell, which may indicate that the queen is chewing away from inside and that hatching is imminent, because she has to chew her way out from the tip of the cell. The workers don't do it, she does. The workers will keep her in. They will stop her emerging if they want to, and they'll keep repairing it on the outside. And that's why if you go through a colony that's at the point of there being loads of ripe queen cells in, because you're disturbing the colony, and the guards that are stopping these queens emerging are no longer able to do their job, you may well find as you go through a colony, and if you're observant enough, you may suddenly see virgins emerging all over the place. But once again, it's a matter of experience. It's a matter of recognizing virgin queens. And it takes experience and knowledge to spot these things. But it's something that happens. I used to see this quite a bit when I was doing bee inspecting, because I would go into colonies which hadn't been managed, any swarm control management, and often I'd go into a colony where they'd already swarmed, and it was at the point where there were multiple virgins about to hatch. And by just going through the hive, moving the frames around, you get multiple hatching of virgins.
course, if you want to play, you could always cut a queen cell or two out and put it in a container and put it on your airing cupboard, and
Yeah, see what happens. Yeah, you can play. You can incubate it. It's not a big problem. I think probably you have to. It's preferable to keep the queen cells vertical, and you've got to make sure they don't dry out. So you need a bit of humidity in your airing cupboard, a bit of a cup, mug of water or something with it. Not dunked in it, but in the airing cupboard to keep the airing cupboard humid. Yeah, you can do all sorts of tricks like that. You can put it inside an old hair curler so it can't escape, and just observe it every day and wait for it to hatch.
That's what I do. That's what I do with queen rearing. Is I have a chicken incubator, and I put the queen cells vertical in a hair roller, and of course you must put water in to make sure that it's got enough humidity. Keep them vertical and don't shake them. Handle them very carefully. So if you've got queen cells on a frame, don't shake it. Don't shake it. And queens, if a queen is near hatching, and you happen to knock it, then you can easily damage its wings. Yeah. So I've seen queens coming out, only one or two this year, with a damaged wing. And that's why if there's no open queen cell, I will always leave 2 sealed cells, just in case one of them has a problem. And I'll put it back and I won't touch it until the virgins come out. And then I'll check it 7 or 8 days later just to make sure she's come out. One has come out. And then I know that I've got a queen there. Then I put it back and I leave it for another 10 days. Let it mate on its own, come back, start laying, and I should see it laying. But so there are many things you can do with queen cells.
Yeah, never waste a queen cell.
Unless it's a swarmy colony or a nasty one.
Well, yes.
Just 2.
Yeah, but it's
I tend to use 2.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you are. Everyone has their own preferences. But I'm afraid I've seen too many leave 2 sealed queen cells and then they swarm.
Well, I have colonies. I've got colonies that only make 2 or 3 queen cells when they swarm.
Yeah, well, there you are. That's right. It's an individual thing again. With different colonies have different approaches to life. Some will make 5, some will make 30. 30 is not unheard of. 40.
No, that's right. It's true. So Peter and Fran. Peter's got his hand up.
Yeah, just wanted to ask if there's a session at the Wern this Saturday, could we come along to it?
You certainly could. Just send me an email so I've got a record that you're going to be there.
Okay.
Yes. Excellent.
The weather forecast isn't very good, so you'll have to bring an umbrella, I think.
Okay.
But Roger has got things to do with his young queen, so I think we'll be there anyway on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll send an email.
Thank you, Fran. Julian, did we answer your question? Sorry.
Yes. Good.
Brilliant.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else like to ask a question? I think people are dropping off. We're down to 9 now, but that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You all okay? Thank you, everybody, for your time. Any questions? Any questions? Send them to me, David or Peter, and we'll try our best to answer them and raise them at the next session as well.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Cheers, guys.